The time has come for me to finally showcase my Great Sage of Heavenly Lost Solrairon deck profile for the current meta of Cardfight Vanguard. What is up, card fighters, and welcome back to the Prime Vanguard channel, and today I'll be showcasing my Great Sage of Heavenly Lost Solrairon deck profile. This is a deck that I've been showcasing you guys for the past 2 weeks now, and I've been playing it for about 2.5 weeks, so I believe the timeline matches up. I've trained with this deck, I've done fight showcasing with this deck, and I'm ready to show you guys the build that I've been pretty satisfied with. I'm pretty happy and confident in this list. I think that Solrairon right now as a deck is not in the greatest position just because of how strong or fast the other decks are, like Ava, Willista, and Gandiva, but it can put up a fight. It's not an easy beatdown. The power it accumulates, the stacking of the deck, the multi-attacks, as well as the resource management if you play your cards correctly, means that this deck has a really good chance of keeping up with other decks. It just needs a little bit of push, and hopefully with the next wave of support that it's going to get very soon, we'll see what sort of changes will bring for the future of the deck. But with that being said, I'm ready to showcase you guys my deck profile on it so that we can go ahead and get discussion going on the future of Solrairon. Now wait, before I can show you guys this deck profile though, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and don't forget the notification bell. A lot of you guys watching my videos aren't subscribed to my channel, and what's up with that? But with that being said, we'll go ahead and hop over to camera 2 and get this deck profile started. Going into our ride line, we are starting off with the Solrairon base ride line. Now, this ride line is the most consistent. There actually isn't one out there right now that I think is better than this. You have the Illyrion and the Stogron, which come out later game on your first Solrairon turn, and they both do something that is going to matter later. Stogron being your countercharge piece for any of the skills you might activate prior to your Vanguard's ability, and taking itself off the board is extremely helpful, as well as Illyrion being able to set up your first skill to stack the deck to make sure that Solrairon's first auto ability is ready to go. And now we're going to talk about the star of the show himself, which is 3 copies of Great Sage of Heavenly Lost Solrairon. So Solrairon has 2 effects, realistically 3, but his first ability is to, at the beginning of your battle phase, Soul Blast 1 and declare either a normal or trigger unit and reveal the top card of your deck. If you reveal the card type you declared, he gets the continuous skill of all units get power plus 5,000 till end of turn. His auto ability is when he attacks, you counterblast 1, you look at the top 2 cards of your deck, choose a card from among them, call it to rearguard or discard it, and put the rest on the top or bottom of the deck. Now with Solrairon, it's very clear to see what the strategy is. Being able to stack 5,000 power to all of your rearguards essentially gives you an early game pseudo Persona Ride turn, because you're going to easily make a full board. Your first turn with Solrairon enter Illyrion Stogron, which gives you a column. Then you'll be playing rearguards prior, and then get 4 attacks with him, and then all of them will be additional 5k power. This card is a really easy time setting up for the skill. You have plenty of abilities in your deck that help you stack the deck or put the unit you want on top for his second ability and first ability, so when you declare it, you'll be able to get the 5,000 power and then choose which your 4th attacking unit is going to be. Consistency is really easy to do and maintain with this deck. It's actually not as bad as people make it out to be because of the 5,000 power and the multi-attack. Being able to stack the deck again after you call something out means that depending on what you've chosen for your target or abilities, or if you don't like that or if you see something better, you're always able to switch it out and put something else to the bottom. This way, we essentially get a 1 to 2 card cycle through our deck, because we're going to have to use a skill to stack as well as an ability to stack again with Solrairon, and the discarding very rarely ever happens. You always want to make sure that you're able to open up one of your rearguards to get that 4th attack, or be prepared to sacrifice one of your slots and make sure it's not a card that you don't care about that you're losing out on. However, the 5k power and the multi-attack is very easy to meet. Resource management is just the hardest part about this deck. However, with the cards that I have coming up, we're going to see how we can mitigate this issue. Next up, I play 1 copy of Gradius Grottle. Persona Riding in this deck is lethal and extremely necessary. If you miss out on declaring the 5k skill, or if you miss out on your Persona Ride, not only do you miss out on a point of soul, but you also miss out on the additional power that your front row will get to maintain your tempo and your pressure. So being able to Persona Ride as much as possible is necessary, so this is a mandatory one of. Next up, we have 4 copies of Dependable Pierce Dragon. Pierce Dragon and Illyrion both share the same ability. They have the effect of when placed, you choose a normal unit from your hand, you put it on the top of the deck, and then draw a card. Dependable Pierce and Illyrion have the same ability where when they're placed, if your Vanguard is Solrairon, you draw a card and then put a normal unit from your hand to the top of the deck. Then this helps you stack up with your ability, so that this way when you go into the declaration skill, you know what your card target is going to be for your calling ability, as well as the ability of Solrairon's first skill. The second skill is when it sees Solrairon's ability active, he gets 5,000 power. At the end of the battle, he'll put himself into soul. So this is one of our soul charging pieces that we have in the deck. It's actually very powerful because it's a soul charging piece that happens during the battle phase, which means that if we put a Cadwaya on the top of our deck or another piece that requires a soul blast later in the game or during the mid battle phase, this card will replace the card used as soul blast for Solrairon's skill, if not set up for next turn. One important fact I want to note about this card, however, to all my other Solrairon players that want to learn this deck, this ability, the second skill, only activates if this card was in play to see Solrairon use his first skill. So if you call this card out with the ability of Solrairon, you don't get the 5,000 power nor the ability to move this card into soul. You'll have to wait until next turn to do that. This is a mandatory forward of the deck. You need to play 4 copies of this because this is one of the pieces that, aggressively speaking, helps you in your offense, as well as one of the pieces that helps you stack the deck and helps you filter out through more of your cards. So 4 of this is mandatory because it's a soul charging piece, it stacks, as well as the fact that it helps you, again, maintain resources, which is very important for this deck. Moving on to my grade 2s, I'm playing 4 copies of Drilling Angel. Now, Drilling Angel is a mandatory grade 2 piece for this deck. Its ability to soul charge 1 and then let you call something out if you hit the target is not only very easy to manipulate and control, but also very necessary for this deck. Because right now in Keter Sanctuary, we don't have that many cards that soul charge on command or on place. So therefore, if we need that early soul to trigger our Solrairon's ability or for our other skills, this card, if anything, is a soul charge 1. And then it's nice to get the extra body on board if you get that and filter out through your deck for more pieces. It's a good card to call out in the early game to rush with. You can also hold on to 1 copy of this in the later game of the Persona Ride turn when you've burnt out through more of your deck to pick one of your cards, move into the soul, and increase your chances of seeing a target, essentially giving you 5 attacks without costing you any resources. For my next grade 2, and a bit of an odd one, I'm actually playing 4 copies of Knight of Piercing Cadwaya. Now, Cadwaya, I want to discuss this for a minute. The reason why I'm playing Cadwaya over the Carbray and the Stogron pieces is because, for one, my deck is built around resource management and focusing on Persona Riding with Solrairon to push really hard in the late game as well as push hard in the early game. It's only in the mid game that the deck gets a little bit awkward because it has to deal with the back and forth that your opponent might deal with on their grade 3 turn, but that's something that we can work around with depending on our matchup. Now, Cadwaya is a piece that also takes itself off of the board and helps you filter out for another piece that you need. And all of our key pieces that we need in this deck that are good or important are grade 2s or 3s. You need to see your Drilling Angels for late game plays. You need to see your Pierce Dragons for soul charging. You need to see your Solrairon for your Persona Riding. And if not, you get to draw a card off of it. Although this card does cost a soul, but I'd rather this card cost a soul, take itself off of the board so it's not a target for a deck like Gondiva to take advantage of, and fetch me another piece that I need for the later game where I really want to continue pushing. This way I can maintain tempo. I think that Carbray is a cool card. I like the idea of Carbray, you know, taking over this card's slots, and you can play it with the Stogron to get the extra attack, but I really want you guys to think and consider this. If you play Carbray over this card, not only do you have to give up some of your slots to play Stogron so that you get the counter charge for it, but what exactly do you call with Carbray? Carbray, yes, it gives you 5 attacks, but you're going to call what? A grade 3 that you can't do anything with till next turn, a grade 2 who will give you a soul charge, but you can't take advantage of its skill to deck thin because you probably didn't boost your boosters yet if you're playing the deck correctly. There's no good targets right now in Solrairon that the deck has, or that I want to put in the deck that I felt like was worth calling with Carbray. And I just thought about something, which is that with Carbray, you can't even call it your grade 3 targets because they have to go to your hand because it's only grade 2 or lower. So you'd have to play really strong grade 2 and 1 targets to make that skill actually count. I don't like the idea of that. It doesn't feel good to me, and I don't want to be a situation where I'm mandatorily forced into calling out a trigger either. So I'd rather just play this, fetch all my resources, and then do 4 consistently high-powered attacks throughout the match. But I do think that if you want to play Carbray, that's not a bad decision at all. Just understand what you're sacrificing with Carbray because of to get that extra attack and if it's worth it. Moving on to my grade 1s, I am playing 4 copies of my Keter PG Aegis Mare Dragon. Now, I'm playing 4 of the normal PGs simply for the fact that you want to target for all of your skills. So if you unfortunately had to put this on top of the deck, you don't have to worry about not having a target because you play the Elementaria. However, if that's something you don't care about, definitely replace one of these for the Elementaria instead. Next up, I play 4 copies of Dragon Tree Wretch Solda Sakab. Now, I've been iffy with this card's ratios, but I will say that I think this is a 3 to 4 of, because this is Solrairon's draw engine. Our counterblast in the deck doesn't go anywhere else except to Solrairon. So to utilize our CB, you can play this card and get you an extra card draw every single turn, or you can use this card to help stack the deck for the pieces that you need. Playing one of your pieces such as Illyrian, Dependable Pierce Dragon in front of this card means that you can draw a card first, fetch you potentially a normal unit, and then use the skill to dig for your deck for another piece, and then put that normal unit that you actually want on the top of your deck. That's one option. It's also another piece that actually helps you thin out your deck for other cards more because, for example, if we use Solrairon's skill to call something out and stack the deck, instead of putting that key piece that we might want on top of the deck to the bottom, we can use this card that's been called out from the unit in front of it to counterblast 1, get the extra card draw, and cool, we now have a key piece for next turn or a good defensive piece for next turn as well. I've done that a couple of times to fetch an extra Perfect Guard, to fetch Persona Ride. Like, it's really solid to have a card that helps you filter out your deck during any period in the game because of how Solrairon works. I do think that this is a mandatory card that the deck needs to play right now. There aren't any better like draw pieces that this deck has or that Keter has that I think actually works. Like, I tried Painkiller over the Katawaya and I played a power card, but it wasn't worth it to me. Katawaya just did what Painkiller was going to do, but just better. And it was a grade 2 target, so I could actually call it out and hit something versus everything else. I just think that this is cooler because you get to drop it in the early game, start swinging, move it back, and then everything else that calls out in front of it, or you can go ahead and benefit off of later in the game, because this is the only card in your deck that actually costs CB besides your Vanguard. So this is a change that I made to the deck since my training video and my matchups, but I am now playing 4 copies of Knights of Gale Seinvulgar. I feel like Seinvulgar over any Terrace, which is the piece that I was playing prior, is just better overall. When I was playing any Terrace, which is the grade 1 that calls itself out from deck and gives itself 10k, any Terrace is only good for the 1 turn, and you don't want to use that card until later in the game. Whereas with Seinvulgar, as she's in play, if you call her out in the early game and just start swinging with her to get some early game pressure, you can move that card back and then turn it into a 13k with Solrairon skill, an 18k booster, or an 18k attacker you're just going to call over with. And the great thing about it is the fact that because of the way the deck is built and how I've been playing with it, you really do take advantage of the early game better than most of the meta decks right now. Like, Gandiva needs all of its pieces prior to going to grade 3, so it can't do nothing. You can call this to rear guard circle and fight back against the Wallista player when they want to rush you in the early game with their Monasterio pieces that they're bouncing back or they want to attack with. That's an option. You have, like, you can drop this against Ava. It becomes a big enough target to where it can get past the shield value of the Obscurids. So overall, this card, very simple, but actually very powerful in the later game, and it makes those Solrairon turns that you're on feel a lot stronger because we don't have any power-up cards in the deck besides this and the grade 3. So it's also a good target for calling as well with your skills, which means that even if you call this card out, you're sacrificing about, I believe, 5 to 10,000 power compared to any Terrace, but getting that extra 5k from its skill, 5k from Solrairon, and then if you're on Persona Ride, an extra 10k, it still makes a really solid magic number that your opponent has to deal with. So overall, I like this card way better than any Terrace, but I will say that this is a flex slot of the deck, and so is Katawaya if you want to change anything. So those 2 cards are definitely the spots I would play with in the deck. Everything else I've shown you so far does feel mandatory and doesn't feel like it needs to be changed or it's incorrect, besides a couple of tweaks and ratios that you might want to make here and there. Otherwise, I think that this is a very solid piece to play over everything else that Keter has right now. Next up, I play 2 copies of Sage of Elixir Illyrian. Now, Illyrian, as I stated in the ride line, is a very important key piece for this deck. This is one of the pieces you call out that lets you stack, draw a card, and filter out through your deck some more. And we need to play as many copies of our stacking cards as possible. If I could, I would play 3 in the main deck, and obviously one for my ride deck. But I feel like because I want to make space for my power cards, and because I play Drilling Angel and I want to increase my chances of seeing the targets that I want to call during mid-battle phase, such as my Silvergar, Katawaya, I just feel as though 2 of this is fine in the main deck, and obviously one for your ride deck. Any less, and you're going to start seeing stacking problems in the later game, because going into every single turn, you want to open up with at least this or the grade 3. And since I'm not playing the grade 2 that lets you stack the deck and then restack it if you stack it to the bottom, you definitely need to hold on to those key pieces that help you filter out and restack your deck later in the game, so you don't end up like you've seen my prior matches, stuck on relying on luck to determine if Solrairon's skill will be active or not. Because that 5k power to all of your rear guards is so crucial. It's honestly how you keep up with the power of all the other decks, because you're getting that benefit from your Vanguard and you're guaranteeing yourself a 4th attack with a good target. Now for my trigger lineup. So my trigger lineup is a little bit interesting, and I do want to talk about it. I'm playing 4 copy of Disma, 4 copy of Feather, 3 copies of Alpac, 1 of the Keter OT, and then 4 copies of the generic Keter heal trigger. So I feel like with the introduction of the new OT and with the way that the meta is right now, the trigger lineup is interesting to talk about. So 8 crits, 3 draws, 1 Keter OT, and then 4 Keter heal. Now the reason being for the 8 crits, I do think this needs to be discussed. I personally disagree with every single Solrairon player that chooses not to play these. The reason being is because maybe it's the way that my deck is built. However, I feel as though outside of Persona Riding and Drilling Angel and the Pierce Dragon, you want to increase your chances of seeing Soul as much as you possibly can for any period in the game. Because Solrairon requires a Soul Blast for its skill, your Katawaya requires a Soul Blast, and even if you were playing Cardfight, it requires a Soul Blast. This card, although it doesn't become a 10k booster, becoming a 9k booster and then moving itself into the soul and giving something 2k, does mean that at least one of your other attacks will hit a magic number, and if not, you still hit a pretty decent number, even as a booster for rear guards or Vanguard or any other card that has a power-up skill. It's not bad at all. It's also, personally in my opinion, not the worst target to call if you had to call something off of Solrairon's skill because you just couldn't stack the deck and you had to rely on luck. I don't think it's that bad either, because you can set up for it next turn. And then it's important to obviously play 4 of these. I don't think we have any other crits. You just want to play 4 of your generic ones already, because I'm not calling out triggers anymore anyway, because I play the Silvergar now because I don't have to. The front triggers, the 3, I feel like front triggers is better than draws. I think the front triggers are better than draws because, again, in this deck, you want to maximize your offensive capabilities as much as possible, because none of your other units besides the Silvergar and the Dragon acquire power outside of Solrairon's skills. So this card getting the extra shield value as well as pushing your front row forward is super important. And then the Keter Sanctuary OT. I'm playing this still because the 2 other OTs, the blue and the red one, I don't think that they're helpful for this deck. Okay, so the red one will give you an extra attack. That's perfectly fine, but we play fronts, and then we're gonna potentially get 5 attacks in a turn anyway. So I'd rather just boost up my hand against what these crazy decks can do if I see it. And there's the blue one doesn't do anything except, to me, fetch you out Persona Ride and potentially get you back a key piece resource. However, I max out most of the good cards in my deck anyway, so I don't feel like that's necessary. And to me, if anything, it's a waste of offensive capabilities, which this is what this deck needs. It needs to push as hard as it possibly can because it doesn't outside of the Vanguard. And then 4 copies of the regular heal trigger. I don't have 2 copies of the critical heal. I think if anything, I might personally just not play it. I haven't had any problems with this. This deck builds up a really decent hand. You have really good rush in the early game, and if anything, I would play like 1, which I feel like you don't even see that often unless I'm digging for it. So therefore, I'm just sticking with these. In my opinion, if there were any triggers, if there was any necessary changes for my trigger lineup, I would switch back to 2 copies of the original, but keep 2 copies of the Feather. Then I would also change out 2 of my heals to maybe 2 of the crit heals, depending on what I think the meta is going to look like, and potentially drop 1 of the crits for a front. I actually do value the extra shield value right now, and because of decks like Gandiva and Ava and Ballista, who do and get like really high power right now, especially because of the sort of combos that the decks are making, as well as some of the pieces that these decks have, and they just snowball like crazy in the later game. Potentially getting one more front in the deck and doing that sort of push might actually not be horrible. And if I were to switch to Cardfight, I think that's the route I would go, because it's 5 attacks and I would want all 5 of those attacks be maximized as best I possibly can. Alright you guys, that concludes my Solrairon deck profile. Thank you so much for staying tuned throughout the entirety of the video and taking a look at my deck. I think that this variation of Solrairon that I've created, it's very unique. It does really well against fighting against the current meta such as Gandiva and Ava, which is what I mainly practice against so far. And it does really good at resource management to help push throughout the later game and maintain a good tempo. It's not like the Cardfight and Stogrind variation where you do have 5 wimpy attacks going at your opponent, but it does a really good job at, again, maintaining tempo and pushing in the early game and the late game with some of the card changes and personal choices that I've made for the deck. But with that being said, card fighters, I'm gonna go ahead and send you off. Stay safe and keep on card fighting. Peace.